Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone who is joining. I see some people trickling in, so we're gonna leave some time for everybody to join before we start with our introduction. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today. I'm really, really excited of the lineup of topics that we have for today with Dr. Liza Natali. So wow, numbers are ramping up, and please feel free to share in the chat. How old is your baby, or when are you expecting your baby? Where are you calling from? We love to hear from you, and it also helps us a lot to target a little bit the content for today. So jump in the chat and let us know. I see that there are already some people typing away. Due in April from New York. Welcome. 6-week-old identical twins. Wow, we'll try to touch on some tips for twins from Austin, Minnesota. Okay, so we have a good mix of people expecting and people who already have babies. It's exciting. So let's get the party started. I am Maristela Lucchini. I'm a sleep researcher here at Nanit. I've been here for 3 years. I have 3 kids of my own. They're now 10, 8, and 3. So I'm a little bit out of the newborn phase, but been there. And so I hope I'll be able to share both my professional and personal experience with you guys today. And I'm joined today by Dr. Liza Natali. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience, Liza?
Sure. My name is Dr. Liza Natali. I am a general pediatrician in New York City. I have been in practice for about 21 years. I have 2 kids also who are very much out of this phase. They're 21 years old and 18 years old, but I remember it as if it was yesterday. And as a general pediatrician, I have a particular interest in infant sleep because I know how valuable and important that is for maternal mental health, which is my other interest.
Fantastic. So yeah, today we're gonna focus on newborn sleep, but just so that you know, this is the second session of our Parenthood Unfiltered series. There's gonna be another 2 on infancy and then on toddlerhood. So if that's of interest for you, please feel free to RSVP. All these sessions are also recorded, so we know that parenting is complicated. Sometimes you cannot have this long span of attention for an hour uninterrupted. So you can also go back and check in our communities for the recordings. And stay tuned until the end of the session. We're going to share who's going to be the winner for our giveaway, which is a Nanit Sound Alike. So a fantastic prize, super helpful throughout the whole childhood. So anyways, this is a little bit of housekeeping information, but let us jump in on today's topic, which is newborn. Some of our the people that are connected already have a baby, some are expecting. So we're hoping to give you really all the information that can be super important around this critical time. And then whatever questions you have, feel free to type in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'd love, to address some of these questions. I wanted to start, Liza, really talking about one of the main concerns of parents as they, approach this amazing but also sometimes scary part of their life, which is talking about safety, and in particular, what are all the safe sleep practices that we can implement to prevent SIDS or other, sleep-related death? And so maybe you can start sharing with us a little bit about what you tell the parents that come into your practice, how they can prepare, what they can do, and so we can start from there.
Great. So most people now know that we recommend that babies sleep on their back and are put to sleep on their back because that decreases the risks of SIDS. So this was a recommendation made in the mid-90s. So for those of you who were born before the mid-90s, your parents likely put you to bed on your belly. That's probably a more comfortable position. A lot of grandparents don't understand why we are putting babies to sleep on their back. But we do know that it decreased the risk of SIDS, which is sudden infant death. It's also called SUDS, which is sudden unexplained death in infancy. and it decreased it by about 60%, the risk of SIDS. So it was quite significant. I just want to mention the back to sleep. A lot of people get concerned, like if your baby spits up and they're on their back, are they going to choke? And we know that babies have just natural reflexes that they are not going to choke. They turn their head. So that is not a risk or a concern, and that was definitely studied and has continued to be investigated. So that is one thing. Another really important thing is that the baby is sleeping in their own space. So they're on a firm mattress in their own, like, bassinet next to the bed, or co-sleeper that's next to the bed, for a couple of reasons. One, the firm mattress is important, and most of our mattresses are not firm enough, the ones that we sleep on. You don't want any extra bedding that the baby can get sort of trapped in, or that can cover the baby's face. So blankets, you don't want any pillows. And that also includes a lot of, on the market, there are a lot of like head positioning pillows that are not SIDS safe. There are other things that babies can do to, that you can do with your babies to prevent them from getting a flat head, but those pillows are not recommended and are a SIDS risk. A cooler environment, which is often surprising to people, that it's better for babies to be cool than overheated or overbundled. And so like AC is fine, a fan is fine, and the ideal temperature between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit, as well as no exposure to secondhand smoke. I think also third hand, which is like the smell of smoke on your clothing. So if any of you have partners or are smokers yourself, this is a great opportunity to quit. And I think those are the main ones.
Covered, yeah. And I was there was just recently this article that sort of showed that there was, after many years of declining rates, there was like a recent small uptick. And a lot of what was discussed was that, we're constantly surrounded by all this imagery of like cute nurseries, and with all, as you were mentioning, also all these tools that are supposed to support our baby's development, make them feel cozy. But a lot of the time, we really need to make, our due diligence in checking if, if all these things that are promoted are really safe for our babies. And I think, in most cases, our babies don't need all these things to be, to feel safe, to feel, to sleep well. So that's just a little bit of a caveat, because I think, it's so easy to fall for some of these advertisement. So always just, make sure to check. And, a lot of, I was thinking, you were mentioning that, some of these pillows are, marketed to prevent flathead. You were saying there are other things. What can we maybe share with our parents? What are some other strategies if they are concerned about flathead? What other things they should do rather than using these pillows?
So when babies are in utero, they're smushed. And so sometimes they have like a head tilt preference. So they might look one way and they prefer that. When babies are first born, they have a preference to look toward light. So like the window or a light fixture, and not, unfortunately, our faces yet. And so rotating the baby end to end, like, so if in the bassinet or in the living room you're sitting and the lights are to the right, have the baby, one day they're always looking to the right, the other way you sort of flip them around so that the light is to their left. So you're doing that pretty consistently. Once the stump of the cord falls off, starting tummy time on the floor. So a lot of people feel uneasy about the floor for some reason, but that is the best place in general for babies to be for their safety. So, any surface we think like, oh, well, I'll put them on the couch or I'll put them on the bed, I'm right there, I'm not leaving. But first of all, it's very hard to do a push-up on the bed. The very reason we don't want babies sleeping on their belly is that their face gets smushed in the soft bedding. But also there's a risk of babies wiggling and falling, because we can do something for a second and they could end up on the floor.
Yes.
And I know this just because I get these calls often.
All the time.
So putting them to sleep, putting them on their belly when they're awake several times, like, 3-4 times during the day once this stump comes off, just to kind of do little push-ups. The earlier you start that, the better, because as they become more interested in the world around them, and they start to like recognize faces and want to see things, if they don't have that strength to lift up, then they're going to be really, really fussy and upset when they're on their bellies. And then the knee jerk as parents is to take them off of their bellies, and then they're again spending more time on their back.
Yeah. So there's because you mentioned smoking and exposure to secondhand smoke. There's been a few questions about it, wondering what could be done. One person was asking if buy your clothes secondhand, is it enough to wash them for
Yes.
long cycles, and that should be plenty as a precaution. Another question is about if you have in-laws that smoke, what could be some things that can be done. As you were saying, it would be a great occasion to stop, or at least in the days when you are in the proximity of the babies. Are there other things that you would recommend? There's also a question about smoking and then vaping with nicotine. So what are your recommendations that you would give?
So I know people are all over, I don't know if it's the country or even beyond this country, but in New York, the laws about smoking are so stringent indoors that you can often, like if you're not a smoker, you can smell when someone has been smoking. So if you are in that situation where you're very sensitive that you can smell if somebody's been smoking and you can smell it, then it's too much for your baby. They're not like dogs where they're going to smell something that unless you've lost your sense of smell, that they're going to smell something that you're not. So if you don't smell it on the item or whatever it is, or on your mother-in-law coming in, then I wouldn't be overly concerned. But one thing you can do, and this is tricky with in-laws because the in-law relationship can be tricky. One is that the child of the in-law, whoever, if it's
Yeah.
your partners, should really take the lead on it so that it doesn't create a battle.
Extra tension.
But sometimes if you have like a smock or something that you can have grandma wear, like just if you're going to hold the baby or if you're going to be in the baby's room, that you can just kind of put over your clothing, that can be helpful. Obviously, it's hard to ask them to change their clothes and shower, but if it's a spouse, I would say change your clothes and wash up.
And they're asking, it's not just when the baby's asleep, it's also when the baby's awake, like this prolonged exposure. Again, also, I think, if it's an occasion, like, of course, we want to try to take all the precautions. Having said that, we're not going to be able to, shield our babies from all the possible exposures. So I think, just trying to make sure to do our best. And I think, like, in general, someone was saying how hard sometimes is with people from other generations, which could be our parents, but could also be other caregivers, or babysitter or nannies, who grew up with different recommendations to adapt to some of these new, which, I mean, it's been a while, right? But for them, it's sort of like this new generation of recommendations. And I think this is something that is very important to sort of discuss, safe sleep practices, even while you're choosing maybe your daycare, just like ask questions. How do they implement it? Because, maybe for the first few months, you will be able to be around your child, most of the time, but there will come a time when you're not going to be there. And so having these sort of open conversations on what is your position and how do you want your child to sleep, and how you know that it's safe for them to sleep. It's something that I think it's very important, and we should be sort of very upfront. We can provide information. They don't have to necessarily agree or understand everything, but at the same time, I think it's an important conversation. They were asking about candle smoke. It's not like smoke from something that is burning. It's like related to the cigarettes. So
yeah, no, it's not just flame, like if you're at a campfire,
exactly.
it's the actual, like, I don't know, whatever they process to make
in
the
the
plants.
exactly.
And I should also mention that you can always blame your pediatrician, or you can blame this webinar you did or whatever it is, and you can say like, oh, I learned that, and we want to make sure that,
Blame it on us. Blame it on us.
always.
They don't know us, so they don't have our numbers. They're not going to bother
Exactly. They
us.
can do whatever they want about us.
Fantastic. So I think, and then I think we touched upon, what are the safe sleep practices, and also in general, some of these things are also, for example, the fact that the room needs to be cool. These are also things that in general help babies sleep well. Being in a cool environment. That's true for babies. That's also true for adults. I think in general, we tend to be a little bit overprotective, but if you're not wearing, if you're not sleeping under two blankets, most likely your baby does not need those two, layers. Um, when it gets a little bit warm, as we were saying, not to use loose blankets. We would encourage to use like swaddles or sleep sacks, depending on the age, that don't get loose. And so I think that's what we would normally sort of recommend to ensure that the babies can stay warm without having loose blankets around. Similarly, I would say, things like levis or, stuffed animals that, very often we're gifted and can be very, very cute at this particular stage should stay out of the crib at all times. What
So
are, yeah, go ahead.
someone had just, I noticed a question about what are the risks, and I know we talked a lot about the smoking, and hopefully it's only a small group of you that have to deal with this issue, but so the risks of secondhand and thirdhand smoke exposure in infants is, in addition to SIDS, is an increased risk of potential for asthma,
Respiratory,
lung issues, bronchitis, pneumonias, wheezing episodes with viral illnesses, and that is mainly from the nicotine, and babies who are exposed to high concentrations of people smoking marijuana can also have concentrations of marijuana in their system. So,
yeah.
which is not great.
Oh, thank you for catching that. I had missed it. One other thing that I wanted to mention is also the age range of when, we are, there is a risk for SIDS. So in general, we would say for the first year of life, to, have all these precautions. Having said that, when we're talking particularly about their position and when they fall asleep, if at some point your baby is able to roll, and so during the night they are able to naturally, roll, you're not going to have to worry all the time to rush back and put them back, right?
Right. So that's an important, the reason we have so many guidelines and recommendations is because if you put them to sleep on a firm mattress, on their back, no free bedding or pillows, if they roll from their back to their belly, they have the strength. It is harder to roll from your back to your belly than your belly to your back, provided you've done all that tummy time. And then you have all those other SIDS precautions in place. So you do not need to monitor, I mean, you're gonna monitor your baby, but you don't need to flip them back over. They can sleep on their belly once they have gotten there themselves.
And one last thing, I think, as you were mentioning, that we have all these layers because sudden infant death syndrome is actually not something that we can prevent completely, right? It's something that sometimes happens, and unfortunately we still don't know why. We know what are all these things that we can do to ensure that we put our baby in the safest position possible. But I just wanted to sort of frame it because I think it's really important to know that these are not causes, these are precautions. And so I think the more we try to implement all these things, the better we can feel that we have done everything we can to put our baby in the safest way possible. And I think before you touched upon where the baby would sleep. So even if you're deciding, for these first few months, you want your baby close to you, there are ways that that you can safely go sleep where you can have, this sort of cribs attached, but the baby's sort of in a separate space. And so these are the things that are sort of recommended to ensure that you can keep your baby close, can stay close to you for breastfeeding, for comfort, but at the same time that they could have their own space, and so that you could follow all these recommendations.
There's one other thing I didn't mention, Maristella, which is you don't want to prop your baby up. So putting like blankets or something underneath the mattress to kind of raise it on an angle So if
Mm-hmm.
he's lying like this, like if they, to prevent spitting up or what have you,
Yeah.
that is also not recommended. They should be flat.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Very important. And then there's a question about weighted sleep sacks. There's been some marketing about weighted sleep sack. Um, and I think, I would not recommend them. I know that some people say that it might help the baby, feel sort of like similar to the pressure of the hand. Um, I don't think that's sort of necessary to help your child sleep, and it's not necessarily safe. I don't know what
Correct.
your take on
And I
that,
believe
Megan.
that there was a warning
Recall.
about
Yeah.
them with
Yeah.
regard to
Yeah.
SIDS risk.
Exactly. So again, I think this sort of falls under what I was mentioning before, that there's a lot of advertisement and there's a lot of sort of anecdotal evidence that is shared. But I think that these opportunities like this, but also doing, your research is always a good way to make sure that things that you read or reviews that you see, how do they compare with what is actually sort of supported by science and recommended by, pediatricians.
And I
Um,
think when you're buying something for sleep, um, I don't have the exact address, but you can look up on like Safe Sleep
yeah,
site, about, or like a SID site about whether or not certain things are
recommended. Yeah.
sleep safe. Because there are a lot of things like I forgot what it's called, but it's very popular, that it's like a little cocoon that babies are
Like a
in,
dot dot.
DockATot.
Yes.
That is not recommended for
Yeah.
sleep. But you kind of think like, well, then what is it recommended for? There are a lot of things like that where it's like, well, I would obviously use this for sleep, but it's not recommended for sleep. But
Clear. So I think we have covered most of our questions, most of the topics relative to safe sleep. If you have any other questions, feel free to type in the chat. And I would now sort of move on to our next chunk, which is about what to expect and sort of how also to guide our babies as they, enter this phase, because I think, it's a period of such rapid evolution and also of huge variability, like that it's really hard sometimes to know what should I expect, what is normal, how should I behave. So do you want to give us just like a little bit of a starter on, what should parents expect in this first few months of life in terms of um, what babies do relative to their sleep?
so babies need a tremendous amount of sleep. The majority of their day, I would say, upwards of 18 hours is sleeping. It's not the way we want them to sleep, which would be a few lovely naps in the morning, throughout the day, and then a nice chunk at night. They are born nocturnal, so they tend to be up more during the night and sleep more during the day. And you want to try to shift that, because in the first 3 months of life, babies really don't have melatonin, which is going to help regulate their sleep cycles. So they are really guiding their sleep often based on feeding, and sometimes based on being overtired, which I'm going to mention in a moment. But
Yeah.
so in the beginning, you'll see babies might give you a big chunk when they're first born of sleep during the day, and you'll be like, oh, my baby's an amazing sleeper, and then
Woohoo!
all night, and so you want to try to limit babies' sleeping time during the day. I say to a max of 3 hours. So you don't want them to, it has not, and this has nothing, anything I'm talking about sleep doesn't have anything to do with feeding, but it's just a max of 3 hours of nap time, and then wake up, annoyed, do whatever you need to do to try to break the sleep cycle. And then
Mhm.
I generally will say, once babies, because we expect babies will lose weight when they're first born, once they're back at their birth weight, you do not need to wake them at night. So they can go 4 hours, they can go 5 hours. They're not going to go much more than that, because they're going to be hungry.
Hungry. Yeah.
And they usually will eat, in the first month or so. A breastfed baby eats every hour and a half to 3 hours. A bottle fed baby, be it breast or formula, will eat every 3 to 4 hours. But that extends as they get bigger. But one of the most important things is that we tend to forget that, like, we're very rigid and we want to schedule. and babies are not following our schedule. Like
Yeah.
they're following their own schedule. And so we try to put them into a schedule and it generally doesn't work. So
Yeah.
paying it the same way we pay attention to when our babies need to eat, we want to make sure we pay attention to when our babies need to sleep. And from day one, you will be able to see when because they came from a very calm, the womb is like calm, quiet, dark, and then they come to this sort of like noisy, bright, everybody wants to
Chaotic.
visit them environment. And so there's a transition, and it takes really several months for them to adjust to being in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so they get overwhelmed or overstimulated very easily. If they are kind of like in a what we call quiet alert state, where their eyes are open, but they're just kind of like just spaced
Yeah.
out and staring, you generally want to leave them alone. Because in that moment, their brain is processing information and they will likely start to fall asleep.
Yeah.
If we think like, oh, look at this, let me say you something else, or try to get them excited because we think they're bored. Babies are never bored. Then they're going to get agitated.
Yeah.
In general, like even from the get-go, when you see your baby who's like spaced out and glazed, they're usually saying like they're in a sort of a chill, low stress time, and they're probably going to fall asleep.
Yeah.
When they start to get herky jerky and
Firmly.
twitchy, say it again.
Squirmly.
Squirmy, exactly. They that's often like it's almost like an adrenaline surge, like they're in fight or flight, they're stressed, and then they'll go from that to 0 to 60 crying. We will often with young babies assume that they're hungry, and so if you're nursing, you put them to the breast, they fall asleep. Then you try to put them down, they wake up, and so we in general, when babies are hungry and when babies are tired, it's a different
Mm-hmm.
cry. Hungry usually starts kind of like, like, hey, I'm hungry over here. And then it might escalate. Whereas babies who are tired are like, like
High pitch, desperate.
intense.
Yeah.
And so start just from the get-go. And even if, for those of you who have, 6 weeks old, 6-week olds, or 3-month olds, or whatever it is, if you pay attention to your baby's individual sleep cues and wake window of how much is like just the right amount before a nap, their sleep will find a schedule and a pattern
Yeah.
that you can then adapt to.
Yeah. I think you covered so much. So I'm just gonna try to highlight like
Okay.
so many helpful things, And so I wanted to like highlight some of the things that are to me are the most interesting. So first is the first couple of months, expect to, have to know this person, right? And don't try to come with too much scheduling because it might just stress you out. I know that as parents, it would be great if we could know when we can plan to go grocery shopping or when we can plan to take a nap. And sometimes that does not happen right away. It truly depends on the babies. Some people are super lucky and their babies like great sleeper from the beginning, but most babies, it takes a little bit. And as you said, they don't know, night and day. They need to adjust. And so one thing that we can do to help them, so someone is asking, how do you keep your baby awake? So I think one thing that is super helpful from the beginning is to expose your baby to signs that help them understand when it's night and when it's day. So although, for example, for us, if we have to take a nap, let's say during the day, we might go to a dark room. But for babies, especially this first few months of life, it's super important to be in the light during the day and be in the dark at night. And that really is going to help them sync. They're not going to have any problems taking a nap, even if it's bright. When they're tired, they're going to fall asleep. But the absorption of these signals will be critical for them to learn the difference between night and day, right?
Yeah, and what I was going to say too is that naps don't need a nap routine. Like a nap can be like, oh, you look tired, down. You don't need to
Especially in this
do
first few months, right? It's something
exactly.
that it will build in time when they're scheduled.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But in
So,
the
and I think
beginning, it's like, it's just, you're tired, you're down. You don't have
done.
to like, oh, let me change the diaper, let me feed, let me this, let me
Exactly.
that. And you also, in addition to the naps in the light, also you want to try to avoid whispering. You want to keep, I mean, not
Regular,
screaming,
yeah.
but keep regular volume of sound in the house, because otherwise you're going to be like the house who's like, we've got the baby sleeping, and they can sleep through pretty much anything.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you were I'm trying also to stay on track on what people are asking. There are just some questions about safe sleep because we just sort of shifted. I'll get back to them at the end. So I've read them. We'll get back to that. We're just gonna sort of stay in the flow for now. Some people asked, no, a person was mentioning sometimes it's hard to understand the difference between the cries, and I totally get it. I feel like as a new parent, there there's just so much that we're getting to know about our babies. And so I feel like, we don't have to feel like bad parents if we don't right away distinguish what is hunger, what is tiredness. And and some of the babies have different temperament. They can also have very different sleep cues. I mean, I have 3 kids, and I can tell you between my firstborn and my secondborn, I felt like I was a first-time parent all over again, just because yeah, someone said it's my first baby and I still don't know the difference between the cries. So I feel like, it's something that it's not necessarily just the cries. Like you can sort of, it's a little bit of a mystery puzzle. You kind of have to little by little learn all the cues from the way that, they maybe start to rub, or and that's how they tell you they're overtired, or some babies can go for longer stretches right away. So really, I think, getting to know this person is critical, and sometimes having the patience to know that there will be some days that you will misread some of these signs, and that's totally okay, and the next day you will start over.
And I should mention that often it's hard to know the specifics of the cries, and that what I was trying to allude to is that we assume as new parents, as parents, that babies sort of cry for 2 reasons between birth and 3 months. One is hunger, and the second is gas. And that
Hmm.
seems to be every cry. Not really. And I try to sort of reinforce that being overtired is another big reason that babies will cry. And we try to figure out, especially with the internet now, it's like, why is my baby crying? And you can read a list of like all these horrible things. And when I tell families like, your baby's overtired, they're like, no, 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 it can't be overtired. It can't be overtired. It has to be something more than that, because it seems so simple. Like, why is the baby so upset? But if you're like hangry and your baby is like starving and you put them to the breast and they go and fall asleep, they weren't really hungry. They just needed something to suck on for comfort. So you start to learn your own baby and like the different sort of like 0 to 60 versus um, and then so
Yeah.
I just go ahead. Sorry, Marcel.
No, no, go, go, go.
I had noticed someone had mentioned, how do you keep babies awake? There is no reason to keep a baby awake if they want to sleep. So if your baby, we're talking about the 0 to 3 month period. Like if your baby has a wake window of 30 minutes and then tells you they need to take a nap, then they take a nap. They might have shorter naps throughout the day rather than fewer and longer naps. But I would never really recommend to keep a baby awake, because they're just going to potentially snowball on itself and get overtired, and
Mhm.
then have that hysterical witching hour at the end of the day that kind of goes away by 3 months, but
Yeah,
where they're just, overtired and overwhelmed.
yeah. And so I think it's so there's one question about should we differentiate naps versus bedtime in terms of like what we do. And I think you touched upon that. Like naps in the first few months is sort of a very, they're tired, that we put them to bed, we try not to overstretch, and in little by little we're gonna build up these routines, right, where it's, you feed them and then you do a little bit of tummy time and then you go take a walk, and as they get older we sort of create these longer stretches, but I think in the first few months are really just sort of building the skills and, extending their ability to be awake. And I think, I wanted to mention about, sleep cues. I didn't mention in the beginning, but we have given this time like a worksheet just for you guys to sort of take notes about the things that we say. And so I think, if you have some sleep cues in mind and you want to type them in the chat and like let us know what we think about, if there might be sleep cues or not. Happy, to have conversation. I feel like as we were saying before about cries, sometimes we don't know exactly what a sleep cue is, what we should look at. I think you were mentioning before, Eliza, there's a moment when they're sort of dozing off, and then like when they're not allowed to, rest, they might get overtired and then show this signs of overtiredness. One thing that I wanted to say is that, as you mentioned, because this time is so unpredictable, I think it's really important to have some conversations before baby's born, before we are in this phase where we're completely sleep deprived, on how we are going to handle this, right? Because we're not going to be able to be on a schedule where I'm like, nap when the baby naps. Sure, we can try, but it's not always realistic, especially maybe if you're not your first baby, or like if you are going back to work super soon, like life is not as easy. And so I think, for me, this is something that is truly important, to be prepared for it, knowing that the first couple of months things will be pretty hectic. And so trying to reach out to the people that are in your network and your support system, to know who will be available for, coming for a couple of hours in the afternoon, or talking with your partners, or how you're going to handle the night, so that even if maybe you are the one who are going to be home, you will still get enough sleep that you're going to be able to be home with with your baby throughout the night. So I think these are helpful conversation, and very often, we get prepared with all the cute outfits and all the nursery, and like we think about, well, we're going to figure these things out once the baby comes, whereas it's so much harder to have these conversations when you have a baby with you, right? And whereas it's so much easier to start to do some planning or start some conversations before. I don't know what your thought about that.
No, I think that's really important. And I also think that in the beginning, sometimes, parents want to do everything at night together. And then nobody's well rested, even if everybody's on leave. And so just sharing the load is very helpful. I agree. And even if you're home and someone's going to work, that doesn't mean your job is easier. You can't go to the bathroom in peace, at home. So
Yeah.
it's tough.
Yeah. And I think, it's also understanding, your strength and for example, for me, it's really hard to stay awake late in the evening. My husband is so much better than that. I don't mind waking up very early in the morning. And I think, that was something that for us was pretty clear from the beginning. And I think that it played a huge role in how we decided to handle the nights where, he would, feed the baby at 11, and then I would wake up at 4. But that allowed each of us to get those, 5 hours of, a longer stretch. And it was really life-saving. And I think, having these conversations before really allow us to be a little bit more objective and think about, what are some strategies that we can put in place? Who are the best people that we could ask to come over in the afternoon that would, it's just like, they're very helpful conversations to have. So I just wanted to encourage everybody. And it's never too late, even if the baby is already out. A lot of our parents already have a baby. It's never too late to have these conversations if you feel like you're not getting the sleep that you need, right?
And one thing I should mention is that, like, historically, we are pack animals. We would live with our tribe together, and we would have support of, like, if for the moms on the call, like, we would be in our tent with other women, and they would help support us, and we would rest, and they would help feed our baby if we couldn't, and what have you. Now we sort of have the baby, and then we go home to like a silo where we're all by ourselves. And it's sort of, people joke about like it takes a village, but it really does. And we're not designed to be doing this all by ourselves. And often there can be a lot of pressure on new moms in particular, and especially new moms who are nursing, to do sort of the brunt of everything. And
Yeah.
it makes it that much harder, especially if you're sleep deprived.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to mention is that when we talk about sleep, there's a lot of judgment about sleep and the need and importance for sleep. So sleep is not a luxury. Like, if people want their babies to sleep longer, it doesn't mean you don't want to be with your baby or that you don't love your baby,
Yeah.
to the moon. But it's just, you're your best self when you are rested. Babies too are their best selves when they are rested. So you see that they're able to learn more and focus more and are less emotional, and the same way, meaning like they're crying and fussy less, but it's the same for us. And so, that's why it's such an important topic. It's not something that is a selfish need. It's really a physiologic, you know,
We don't want to
health
get
need.
pampered. We just want to actually, be functional and be at our best for our babies. And I think, this is so important. Also, to feel free to have these conversations without, the guilt of saying, oh, I'm asking for the moon. Not really. And I know that everybody's circumstances are different. So how people are gonna decide to approach this could be, a million different ways, but just putting sleep at the center of the conversation can be super helpful. And I think, we were talking about how in these first few months things are so fluctuating. And then, as we approach when the babies get 3 to 4 months old, sort of things starts to slowly shift. And I think this is when, um, schedules and routines, can become a little bit more relevant. I feel like I always encourage parents, especially for bedtime, if possible, to start this routine, even if at the beginning, they feel a little silly. You might read a book to a 2 weeks old and you feel like, what am I doing? This baby, what does he understand? But it first, I think it just helps to start to build some rhythm. I think as parents, sometimes days and night and weeks are sort of like this whole big blur. And so just starting to build these rhythms, but particularly as we get to these, like 3 months old, these things start to, play a crucial role. And so, it could be, it doesn't have to be anything like incredibly complicated, like a theater production. It could be something as simple as, diaper change, feeding, reading a book, or singing a song. If for some babies, bath, it's a calming activity that could be included too. And then, I don't know, people in the chat can start to share what are some of the things that you like to include in your bedtime routine. One thing that I always recommend parents is also do things that both you and your child enjoy. Like, I know that say that everybody says that reading is great. If when you try to read to your child, it's, they're screaming like crazy every night, maybe you can try to sing a song or something, that can be, it should be a beautiful time of bonding between you and the baby and something that can help them settle down. We can build these sort of associations, maybe with, white noise. We have the sound and light machine. We want the room to be dark at night. So babies that are not afraid of dark, so we don't have to worry about that. But noise can not just mask some of the surrounding noise, but also become a sleep association. And so I wonder, if what are your thoughts on, like, what are some simple things that parents can do to create these bedtime routines, when they can start? Yeah.
So I agree pretty much with everything Maricela just said. So when babies are born, their senses are intact, but their eyesight is the weakest of their senses. So smell and hearing are much more developed because they've been smelling and hearing in utero and they have not been using their eyes to see. So we are very dependent on vision. But for babies, it really is your voice and singing to them and like sort of a running commentary throughout the day. But at night, especially starting at 3 months, but doing it in the beginning is sort of fun anyway, is just they want to hear your voice. Even if you have a terrible singing voice, they'll love your singing voice, and just something in the space where they're going to be sleeping, where you sit sort of calmly and you're giving like an external cue that we're shifting gears. So during the day, you're, reading an exciting book and, this and that, or whatever it is, or you're,
Yeah.
and like, same way that like we don't go from the gym, jump in bed and go to sleep. We read or
Wind
watch
down.
a show, or we have our wind down. And so this is the external cue for babies, like, oh, okay, now we're doing wind down time. The bath, Maricela had mentioned, that comes up a lot. Sometimes the bath can delay bedtime, which can then be overstimulating for some babies. For other babies, it may be very relaxing. For us, if we take a bath, we imagine like, oh, relaxing, closing our eyes, lavender, whatever. But for babies, we're usually playing. We're like splashing and, like this is so exciting. And they're warm and then they're cold and then we rub them up. And so sometimes it can get some babies more excited that they have a harder time settling. So that's why it's like knowing your baby and your baby's sort of mood with it. We're
And
kind of
you're
over.
saying also think about the whole family. Like I feel like, especially when I had my second and third child, just think about the bath started to become completely just like not doable. And so like don't feel the pressure having, to check all the boxes, is that means that then everybody's stressed and you end up delaying things just because they need to get the bath. It's fine. They can do it another time. So I think it's you're saying like know your child and know your life and
Yeah.
know what really can work and that can make sense to do. And I love there was a comment about, singing a song that their parents sang when they were little. And I think, this, I know that there's so much about, this bedtime that can feel stressful at times, but I think these are things that can also remind us about the opportunity for bonding and, having this closure of the day. And I think that, this is something that is beautiful to remember. I think as parents, it's always easy to just think about the things that are hard, but these are also some of the special memories that you would have, spending this time with your baby, rocking them to sleep. And again, like at this stage, there's nothing wrong with just, rocking them to sleep, be with them until they fall asleep. They are teeny tiny. In time, as they get older, around 4 months, 6 months, that when they can learn to be more independent. But when they're teeny tiny, you're not gonna spoil your baby if you're gonna rock them to sleep. And I think this is super important. I know I'm just being mindful of the time. I love that when we talk, like we could probably go on for 3 hours and barely realize it. But so I just wanted to point out as the kids get older and as we're talking about, getting to the schedule, we have the sleep schedule generator, which I think can be very helpful to just get a sense of what are some of the, schedule that could be appropriate with around the age. But again, like, that could be a guideline, but just knowing your child and see how your child wake window is sort of developing, this I think is super important. It says for the 3 hour guideline for naps during the day, is that from birth? I think, as we were saying, from birth, that's the goal, and it doesn't necessarily mean that from day one you're gonna hit that. I think it's like an ideal thing, and that you can sort of work with your baby to get there. I just wanted to go back to two questions that were asked about safe sleep regarding sleeping in the baby carrier and then sleeping in the car seat, which I think are very important. If Eliza, you want to touch
So
upon.
in the baby carrier, I'm presuming, how old is that baby? It's in like a on your chest baby
Yeah,
carrier
it's the front. Yeah,
facing
the
you.
front carrier.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's fine. I would still say, for both of those places, generally a nap shouldn't be more than 3 hours. If you're on, you're driving at night and that's when your baby would sleep the longest, I would still take a 3 hour break, get them
Mhm.
out, take them out of the car seat, kind of let them, move their body a little bit. The issue with the car seats is that there is a tendency for babies to kind of
Yeah.
tip forward, and prolonged tipping forward. We want to make sure that it's not occluding
I
the
see.
the airway.
And
But
I think it's very important. So whenever you buy a car seat, just to make sure that is installed properly. Sometimes also similarly as like the bed, they sell these like cushion props that they're not necessarily, it could actually lead to some of these, positioning as you were mentioning, Liza. So I think, and same for the carrier, just making sure that you are using them safely and correctly. They're not too loose, that the baby's not, in the wrong position. So they are safe. Again, as Liza was mentioning, you wouldn't want to let your baby sleep that throughout the whole night. You need to have the proper breaks. But mostly I would say it's also making sure that they install correctly so that the baby is in the intended position, right? And then I think someone touched upon again 1 second on the marijuana, because there's someone in their house temporarily, they're hosting someone that smokes marijuana. So it's about the smell, and to try to avoid having them in contact with people that have just smoked, where the smoke is still on their clothing, if possible, changing clothes or wear something on them, and ensuring that the baby is not directly exposed for
so the smell on the clothes just is an indication that
it helps to understand, yeah,
like that there is some residual smoke that the baby may
be exposed to, yeah.
be exposed to.
Yeah.
But that's not going to make your baby high. That was one of the questions. But like if you're smoking by your baby,
Yeah.
that may.
Yeah.
And just another plug for gummies, like hide them. They look like candy. We see more and more kids in the emergency rooms.
Yeah. I mean,
That's not 0 to 3 months.
yeah, exactly. I was about to say, hopefully it's something you have to worry down the line, but still,
Right.
And I just wanted, there's one thing that we haven't really discussed a lot about the feeding, the feeding association. I think very often we're like, oh, it's not good if your baby falls asleep on your breast. And again, like I just, wanted to have your take on this, especially in this early month.
So one of the things I do think that babies are able to fall asleep off of you as well as on you. Contact naps and contact sleep is very common. But I'm sure at some point in the nursery, when babies were first born, you saw that they were able to sleep, nicely cozy and swaddled. The swaddle is very helpful for like that womb feeling in the first 3 months while they're sort of transitioning. So it feels really, really tight. A lot of people get nervous about the swaddle because my baby, fights it. Some of the fighting is because if you put the hands down, babies are trying to get up. So I sometimes will say, then just put the baby's hands up here. But a really tight swaddle, we project because we wouldn't want to be in a tight swaddle, but babies love it. They just came from the womb, which was perfect. And so it kind of simulates that. And that came about after we stopped the belly to sleeping, when babies could be in the fetal position or child's pose. Maristella, tell me, what was you
For
asked?
the feeding, falling asleep.
So falling asleep. So when you put your babies down awake and drowsy, as opposed to having fallen asleep on the boob. So they can have that association. They will eventually, hopefully, learn by you working, I say more during the day than at night when your brain is more like capable of functioning, to start to teach them how to like, if they look kind of spaced out and glazed and you swaddle them up and you put them down and they're able to fall asleep on their own, or with you just kind of rubbing your hand on their belly. That is just a primer for the future, that like if they can fall asleep by themselves, a newborn baby's sleep cycle is about an hour.
Yeah.
Ours is an hour and a half, So after an hour, if they have sort of a partial awakening, which we all do, then they're like, oh, I'm not hungry. I can put myself back to sleep for another few sleep cycles or whatever. And so it's like you're teaching them how to be ready for it. But the issue with them falling asleep at the breast or at the bottle has less to do with a problem for them and more for you, because putting a baby to sleep when there are two phases of sleep that newborns are in for the most part. They're in like a mostly light sleep, mostly REM sleep, which is a lighter sleep, where they you put them down and then they wake up, and then you pick them up, they fall asleep, you put them down, they wake up, you know? And so that's the challenge. It's like trying to put them down so that they'll stay asleep, and then they don't, and so you don't get to rest. And so that's where that's where I try to encourage ways to break that association. It's not because it's an issue for the baby.
Yeah, it's just to ensure that they learn to gradually prolong their stretches and
Right.
yeah, and I think it's super important for parents and for them also. Because I think, it's for babies, it's important to sleep well for so many things. Their growth hormones, the way they process information, learning and memory. And so I think really, as you said before, ensuring good sleep is critical for the parents to be their best parents, but it's also super important for your child. And so whatever you're doing to help them, gradually and age appropriately learn how to sleep at their best. It's something that it's really a huge investment for them to to learn and to grow at their best. So I'm just sort of conscious that we're sort of wrapping up.
Can I mention one last thing?
Yes,
Because
1 minute. Yeah.
so the oh shoot, you would just it'll come back to me.
And welcome back. I know we touched upon so many things, so I think it's just really hard. But
Oh, now I remember what it was.
Oh, go,
There are
go,
a bunch of questions. It's very interesting, sort of variations on a theme about how do I kind of keep my baby up, or how do I,
go.
and in general, like, yes, you don't want them to nap for more than 3 hours, but when babies wake up from a nap that is restorative, they wake up like, ah, I'm so happy to be alive. What's next? When they
Mhm.
wake up hysterical and it's been less than 3 hours from a feeding time, they're probably still tired, and they came out of the sleep and they're still like, I didn't want to be here. I still want to be
Mm,
sleeping. And so they need some support to help them get back to sleep,
mhm.
whatever that is. It could be feeding, because it sounds like, again, we assume that the crying is always hunger. And usually when babies wake up hungry, they wake up and they're like, I feel so good right now. What a great nap. Eh,
Mhm.
eh, and and so it's just something to think about, like, is my baby tired right now, or are they really hungry, and how can I help them get back to sleep? But your baby is so stimulated by the world, it's like going to Disney, and
Yeah.
it's like overwhelming because everything is so new. Don't feel that you're depriving your baby of wake time. They will be awake and checking everything out and learning from just you talking and singing and all of that.
Yeah.
That was it.
That was super helpful. Yeah, and I think there's so much stress now to have your baby meet developmental milestones and expose them to all the things. Truth be told, I mean, yes, tummy time, singing, talking, reading, that will be plenty, and then in
Yes.
time they can be exposed to more. We don't have to, jump at them and make them become Harvard geniuses the first week they're out of our womb. So, but anyways, thank you so much, Liza. It's always a true pleasure. And I see also in the chat that everybody was appreciative of your help and your guidance. I hope we've been able to answer all the questions. And then, we have a winner that is going to be announced so soon in the chat, and is there you go. It's Rebecca Lay. So good, congratulations. We're so excited that you're going to be able to use our Sound and Light. And, I just want to remind you that there are other 2 sessions in this week. I'll be on Thursday on toddlers, my bread and butter currently with my 3-year-old, but we also have another one on infants tomorrow. So we hope that you will also be able to attend other relevant sessions or go back to listen to the session if you arrived late, or share it with whoever you think might find this helpful. Thank you again for connecting, and thank you, Liza, and have a good rest of the
Thank
day.
you guys. Have a great
Bye
day.
bye.
Bye.